Hi, all. My name's Jonathan Cobb. I'm a local one stagehand. I'm a union stagehand in New York City. I live in Jackson Heights, Queens, with my wife Debbie, our son Charlie Zoltan Cobb, two dogs, Bubbles and Barney. You can kind of see Barney. He's sleeping here. He's a basset hound, so he's asleep most of the time. Um, I was born in Tuscaloosa at DCH. I was born in 1985, so if you're watching this video, I'm 35 years old right now. I went to Vestavia Elementary. I went to Collins Riverside Junior High. I eventually went to Hillcrest for high school, and that is what ties me to Tuscaloosa is my blood. My mom is Camille Mendel. My stepfather is Dr. Michael Mendel. When I was about 5 years old, my mother put me in a summer arts program, and the program had theater, it had art, it had music, I believe it was, and the theater portion's what I really fell in love with. Mel Christian, who was very involved in Tuscaloosa theaters and in Birmingham, was the supervisor for that, and she directed. I think we did Peter Pan, and I just fell in love with everything about it. Mel is so terrific, and she's done so much for the community, and I can't sing her praises enough. Well, my mom saw how much I loved it, and she talked to Mel. Mel asked us to audition for a children's theater show, and that was how I got involved with Tuscaloosa Children's Theater. Sorry, I acted in shows for them for years. I loved it. It was such a great experience. When I was about 11, there was an opportunity that came up with Theater Tuscaloosa with The King and I auditioned and got a role for that as Prince Chulalonghorn, and that was my first time to work for Theater Tuscaloosa. Tina was involved in that show as well. Michael Carr was the director. I had a great experience. Afterwards, I continued doing shows for Theater Tuscaloosa as an actor and children's theater as an actor. But when I was going through puberty, I stopped being able to sing. Not that I was ever a great singer, but I couldn't hit a note in a bucket. It's just the truth. So I started volunteering more backstage. When I was 14, that led me to volunteer for Charlie Dennis, who was the technical director for Theater Tuscaloosa and for Shelton State at the time. I cannot say enough about what Charlie Dennis and his family did for me. My son is actually named after Charlie. If it wasn't for him fostering and educating me in working backstage, in running a show, in programming, in sound design and lighting design, in construction, I would not be where I am. I would not have the success I've been able to have. And I am forever grateful to Paula and Alicia for sharing Charlie with all of us. So that's my tie to Theater Tuscaloosa as well, is that. So what do I do for a living? As I said earlier, I'm a local one stagehand. Means I work under a union contract. I do shows. I do Broadway shows here. I either work for the house, i.e. working for, let's say, one of the three theater owner organizations, the Schuberts or the Nederlanders or the Jew Jamsons. So I'd work under a local one contract. Or I work for the producers, like Juniper Street or Hudson Theatrical Associates or Aurora Productions. When you work for production, like I'm doing now for a show that we have on pause, Ain't Too Proud, it's the life and times of the Temptations, you are more beholden to the technical supervisor, the producers, of operating a show, maintaining the show, whether it be lighting, whether it be sound, whether it be props, whether it be carpentry, the rigging, things like that. Whereas for the house, it's more of a rank and file work. You have responsibilities, but you answer more to your immediate boss than you have to answer to the producers. When I was finishing high school, I went to the University of Alabama right after to major in the technical theater program. At the time, it was just theater. I believe they have a more technical track now. Bill Teague was my advisor at the time, who's now retired from the university. And I'm glad that he is finally able to get a break. I know how much he worked on that program. He helped me kind of create my own path there for technical direction, doing independent studies and working in the scene shop every day and working on every production that was put in there. Eventually, I think I was technical director for either 2 or 3 productions near the end of my 4 years there. In between those terms, I did summer stock every summer, and I cannot recommend that more to anyone who's watching this that has the opportunity to to get involved with summer stock. So essentially, summer stock, there are theaters, regional theaters all over the country that operate a summer season, typically about 4 shows, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. And they are looking to hire, for the most part, college-age people, older as well, to come in and staff their theaters or staff their scene shops and operate shows. It is such an invaluable way to get started in the business. There's a lot of leeway, there's a lot of room for education, and it's really nurtured in a lot of these places. I was at Glimmerglass Opera in Cooperstown, New York for 2 years. I was also in, 2 summers. My 3rd summer I was in Valdosta, Georgia at the Peach State Summer Theater. I'm not sure if it's still called that, but it was out of the University of Valdosta. And then my last summer stock year was in St. Louis at a regional theater called Stages St. Louis. Wheeler Kincaid, who's the technical director at Theater Tuscaloosa, and I are the same age. We've been in classes together all our lives, and we decided that we would move to New York together. We decided this before I was hired in New York. It was just good happenstance that I found a job coming into it. I was on, I think, Playbill.com or BackstageJobs.com. This was 2007, and the Juilliard School had an opening. They were looking for a welder for their carpentry shop. So I applied. I came to New York and visited. We got along, and they hired me. I worked there for about 9 months when I moved to New York. It was a non-union shop, a non-union venue, which is fine. It just didn't lead me into doing union work. But after my 9 months there, I started working summer of 2008 for Hudson Scenic Studio, which is really one of the last union shops in New York City, definitely in Local 1's jurisdiction. So when I started working for Hudson Scenic, the work was under a union contract. The union is IATSE, Local's number 1. IATSE stands for International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. New York City was the first creation of a union for theatrical workers. There were originally 11. Number 1 is New York City. Number 2 is Chicago. Kind of goes through the major theater cities in the late 1800s. Become those numbers. Number 4 was Brooklyn. Number 3, I believe, is Pittsburgh. But so the contract was under that. I was able to get into the union because I'm the way Local One sets it up, and all locals are different, is that you had to work for 3 consecutive years, making a minimum of $35,000 in work that was only through Local One contracts. So I was able to do that, mostly through working for Hudson Scenic, as well as taking on a few extra jobs that I would get through a replacement room that the union made available. When you'd ever be out of work, you could go there and sign up, sit around for a couple hours, and if anything comes up, they need an extra hand at a load in. If there's a hotel gig that needs some extra hands for lighting or sound rigging, anything like that, you just want to have the skills to be able to fill any of those positions. You sign up, you leave your number, and if anything opens up, you get a call. It's also a great way to meet people, so I was able to get a lot of work from that. Really being personable is incredibly helpful. Local One is, in theater work in general, a lot of it is about your reputation, and if you can be trusted, if you can be easy to work with, if you can be knowledgeable. So try to maintain that. So I did the 3 years. After that, we had 7 classes we needed to take. There was one on the history of Local One. There was one on, I think it was contract language. There was one on personal protective equipment and safety. There was one that was 2 classes. It was a 10-hour OSHA class, occupational safety and health administration. There was I think a rigging class and a sound and lighting class as well. But I finished these classes, then had a fee to pay. I think it was $2,000 at the time, and was sworn in 4 years later after starting everything. So I started working there in the summer for a trial period of 2 weeks, as they typically do with everyone who comes in fresh. And I worked as a welder in the iron shop. That turned into 9 months of work doing welding and carpentry until they finally had a layoff, which is very common to have seasonal layoffs, as the Broadway world works in a fall season and a spring season, and you kind of build around those. So once everything's built, if there's no extra industrial work, by which I mean non-theatrical but still part of the entertainment industry, like hotels or conventions or event gigs, there's no money coming in. They're not going to be able to hire anyone, so they'll do layoffs. After work picked up again, I worked for them from the end of that year, from 2008, almost straight on for a very long time. I still technically work for them. Whenever there's work and I have free time, I call up, and if they have availability and they're looking for someone, I'll come up and work for them. While I was there, I did 4.5 years in the iron shop and carpentry shop. I then moved up to drafting for them for about 1.5 years. You'll see some of the things we worked on. There's some carpentry and welding work for the New York City Ballet's Nutcracker. They had a huge sleigh that hadn't been rebuilt since, I think, 1964, and it came in and we inspected it. We tore the whole thing apart, reused what we could, and rebuilt it safer and stronger. There are 2 children that fly in and out of it every night, so you got to make sure it's up to par. Some aluminum welding pictures here for a recreation of the London Eye, the big Ferris wheel. It was this, so you'll see a big circular truss with a bunch of wire rope acting as spokes. The dancers would get on that and move around. We had that automated so it was moving. There is a chair from America's Got Talent. We have another sleigh, very colorful sleigh from the Elf musical. and a house unit from Cinderella that I had engineered for the company. After I was engineering, I did about half a year as an estimator. The main estimator went on maternity leave, and I guess because I'm Southern and was willing to talk to people on the phone, they asked me to come up and fill in for her while she was taking her leave. So it was about half a year. I was up there doing small project management for events, essentially organizing labor, organizing schedules, organizing estimates. Afterwards, I wanted to take a break, try to get some work in the theater. The owner, Neil Mazzella, who I'm also very grateful to for my career, gave me his blessing and sent me to talk to some people, look around. I ended up meeting Chris Wiggins. I met Chris because the union was holding a truss and rigging engineering class at his theater. He was the head carpenter of the Friedman Theater. During the class, he was sitting next to one of my bosses. He told this guy that his daughter was looking to go to the University of Alabama. So he pointed Chris in my direction, and we connected over that. Chris Wiggins told me that he was looking for a flyman for his show, Constellations, that was coming in. Every show at the Friedman Theater is a limited run show. It's a not-for-profit theater, which means that they have a responsibility to bring in new work. So they typically just do like 3 months on a show, and then they'll have a dark period. But it's a great way to get started because you can, have a lot of experience putting a show in, taking a show out. So he was looking for a flyman. His flyman was just about to go on to do Dr. Zhivago over at the Broadway Theater. It didn't last very long, but it was a conflict with his schedule. So I came on to be the flyman. Turned out it was automation. What I mean by that is that the theater was set up with a counterweight system, much like the one at Theater Tuscaloosa and the Bean Brown Theater. So you have arbors connected to ropes. You put counterweight bricks on those arbors. The arbor is connected at the top to aircraft cable, steel wire. It goes up to a head block, goes over across the grid, and then drops down at different loft blocks. And those loft blocks come down. They attach to the batten. The batten is the pipe. You would attach your scenery or your soft goods or your lighting to that. And that's a counterweight system. With an automated fly system, you essentially take that arbor and the ropes that you pull, you change that rope to a piece of aircraft cable, and you tie it into a winch that's connected to a gearbox motor. And that winch drum becomes the operator. Kind of running it in, running it out. Running it up, running it in is down, up is out. That winch is then connected to a console, a computer console, and the flyman then operates it as an automation operator. So I was doing that. The show went well. It was a terrific experience. Afterwards, we loaded the show out. We loaded in the next one, and there wasn't a place for me on the show. Just wasn't any crew numbers, and that happens sometimes with a show, depending on what the producers need, what they need to accomplish. For scenery or lighting, there might be a big crew, there might be a small crew, and that changes. There's really no guarantee work other than the people who work for production, who work for the producers, or people who work for the house, like the heads of the house. Anyone who's considered an extra stagehand or extra crew member, even the flyman at times can be cut from the show or cut from the theater if there's not enough work for them on the show. So afterwards, there was nothing for me there. I went back to Hudson to do some carpentry for them, and I spoke to a couple of people there, a couple of bosses, and they recommended that I look into going on tour. So I contacted different production companies and found out that the Disney musical Newsies, which had been on tour for about a year, had created a swing position for carpentry and props. And what I mean by that is it was a position where I would be jumping around from different departments, taking over so that the person in that department could have a day off, because at the time they were doing 6 days a week, most of the time 6 days a week, and no one was getting any days off unless it was like a golden day, and which I mean by a golden day they mean like a Monday off. So they had a swing position for carpentry and props. I ended up doing the carpentry jobs for stage right and stage left, the props jobs for stage right and stage left, and the flyman position. Now you might think to yourself, what does a carpenter do while the show's operating? Do they build something? No, that's not really how it works. On a show, different work is broken up into different departments. So let's say you're paging a curtain for an actor to enter or exit, or you're pushing on a piece of scenery, putting it in place, or you are bringing in a piece of scenery or curtain on the fly system. That is all part of the carpentry department. Anything typically that has to do with scenery is known as carpentry. Anything that is handled by the actors, or a chair that's set on, or a table that's danced on or eaten on, anything like that, that is considered props. I've done shows where we've had cars on stage, like actual cars on stage. Those are props. Lighting is its own department. Front light or spotlight operators, that's electrics. A deck electrician who's running around backstage making sure that lights backstage, or like let's say rovers, like rolling towers of lights, are in the right position. That's electrics. Funny enough, the sound department is part of the electrics department. So I did 5 tracks for Newsies. I was out for about a year and 3 months. It was an amazing experience. And if you can find a way to tour, I can't recommend it enough. You learn not only more about the job you're doing, you learn a lot about your own temperament and what you can handle. You can learn how well you can challenge yourself. You also can learn how to work with people that you're not used to working with, and how to succeed working with different personalities and different temperaments, which can be challenging at times. When I finished the tour, we closed and they opened Newsies up to other regional theaters. I came back home and there wasn't really any work. Hudson was not busy at the time. The shows were already open. I put in my name to see if anyone needed a sub, and I was waiting to hear back, see if anyone needed a substitute so that someone working the show could take time off. I went to the replacement room at the Union Hall, and they needed a hand loading in, I think it was a Halloween set for the Harry Connick show. Harry Connick had a talk show on a couple of years ago, and it was filmed at CBS in Studio 41. So I went there for a day to help load in this big kind of bayou cabin scene. It was supposed to be really spooky. So we set it all up and they asked me to stay on. I stayed on for the rest of the season. And near the end of the season, I got a call to sub for production props, so working for the production instead of working for the house, for The Great Comet. It was an amazing show. I had a great time doing it. And when I wasn't subbing for that, I had just gotten a call because Groundhog Day, the musical, was just starting up. It had a run in London, and I think it was the Old Vic Theatre, and they wanted to start doing rehearsals, and they had an automation system. It was a turntable deck that had a big outer turntable, an inner turntable, and then three mini turntables inside of it. And the idea of you with Groundhog Day, it always going backwards. They really leaned into it with the turntables. So I was asked to operate it for the rehearsals. I wasn't doing anything for the show at the time, and I came in every day, met the cast. We loaded in. We loaded in all these turntables. We got them all working for the most part. We got it running well enough that we were able to rehearse everything and get the show onto its feet. Once we got closer to the show going into production at the theater at the August Wilson, there was an opening for assistant props, for assistant production props, and I was offered the role. I also stayed on as sub for the deck automation for doing the turntables, which I did a few times near the end of the run. But my main job was, once the show started, was to load in the props, write the track, and by track I mean what the cues are, where you're going place to place. We refer to that as the track, whether that is an actor's track. A lot of the time actors will refer to their character as the track. Like, let's say Sweeney Todd, there would be a Sweeney track. The backstage, the stagehands, the crew members also have their own tracks. There'd be carpentry track, and there'd be the stage right props track, something like that. So we load in the show, we write the track, we operate the show. The show went, fine. It didn't last as long as we would have wanted it to, and we loaded the show out when it closed. Chris had moved on to the Court Theater, and they had a show coming in Butterfly. It was starring Clive Owen. It was a revival of the show John Lithgow and B.D. Wong had made famous. So he asked me to come in, help load in the show. I came in working for him, working for the house, not for the production. He was my boss. And we put the show in. He then told me that his flyman was going to be moving on to the Christmas show, which is the Big Rockette show. It's one of the biggest shows that comes into New York. And one of his deck carpenters, one of the carpenters that has a track on the deck or the stage, was going to be moving up to flyman, and he had an opening. So I was offered that. I took it, and I have a little boomerang video of us opening and closing some of these sliding panels that were part of the show. The show had all these tracks overhead, and they tied all of these art panels in. They were these huge flats that were operated by carriers up top and a little pin at the bottom, and they had routed tracks in the deck so that you would come through. We all wore costumes. We had these, like early communist China uniforms. It was all black with a hat and a little white collar. And part of our job was we would come on cue to bring in the walls, turn them at whatever angles. As you can see in the video, we drop half the panel to reveal art for a different scene. And that was the show. Another one that didn't run as long as we would have liked it to. It was a great show, a lot of fun. After that, I was offered production props again for Summer, the Donna Summer musical. It was as fun as you could imagine. You learn to love disco, I guess you could say, when you're doing a show like that. But we had a great time. We had 3 cars on the stage that we would store in the air and bring it down. One thing you'll find with Broadway theaters and some around the country, there's so little space for storage that scenery and a lot of the times props will hang chain hoist in the air, motorized chain hoist, and we will store and stack properties and scenery up in the air on top of each other. So we would bring these in, these cars and operate them during the show and get them out. It was wild. That one lasted almost a full year. It was a pretty good run for the Donna Summer musical. After that, I was tapped to continue being assistant props for production for Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations, another car in that show, wouldn't you know it. It's definitely by far one of my favorite shows I've ever been on. We paused the show during the pandemic. My last day working there, our last show was March 11th. We canceled shows on the 12th. My last day of work was on the 13th because I think we had a photo shoot that morning. And we are still waiting for the okay to open up. A lot of conjecture about when that's going to be. Really, it's up in the air. So, what are you going to do? I was lucky enough that the work I did at the Harry Connick show for that season, the head carpenter at that place had some openings working at a couple of different venues where he was having trouble finding people to work. And I took that on, and he and I kept a good relationship, a good working relationship ever since then. And near the end of June, they started investigating how they could open up CBS because Drew Barrymore wanted to start a talk show, and they wanted to do it in Studio 41. So at the time, there was a show called The Mel Robbins Show that had just been canceled, and that was in the studio. Brian Gumbel's Real Sports was also sharing part of the studio. A great show, not canceled, but they were moving it out of the studio to make room for the Drew Barrymore show. So they did a lot of research, CBS. They got involved with a video, I guess, doctor visit app. They had a big questionnaire that everyone had to fill out. And so they kind of had a A team to B team of crew. And we all were contacted with an email to kind of run through these links of answering health questionnaires about our exposure to COVID and travel and things like that. And once you passed that, you ended up downloading this application. And the way it worked is that you would check in, and we still do this. We check in every morning with the app or 24 hours before your call. And you check in with a nurse on video. They ask you some questions about if you've been exposed recently, are you feeling any symptoms, and then you take your temperature. I do an infrared, and you show them the number. And if the number is good, not running a fever, you get an email that clears you for work, and it's sent to CBS. They let you know you're good to come in for the day. So the end of June, we got confirmed to come in and load out the Mel Robbins Show and load out Brian Gumbel's Real Sports. And then we spent the next about month and a half loading in the Drew Barrymore Show. We've already started filming some of the pre-tape segments, but the show from the majority is going to be live, and we're starting to film it on the 14th. Now, I don't know if you're going to see this then or not, but keep your eye out for the show. She's very funny, and she's very, very kind. So I wish the best with the run, and we're all happy to have the work. I can't help but feel not only incredibly privileged for the circumstances I was born into and the support I've received my whole life, but just lucky to have this opportunity to be bringing in some money in my industry for my family in a time where everyone's kind of living off savings and what's left of unemployment. So just goes to show you, try to keep good relationships with the people you work for. Also remember that anyone could be your boss at any point. It's good to speak with people and be kind and give people the benefit of the doubt if you can. let's see, what will I do when Broadway returns? I'll go back to Ain't Too Proud. The producers have promised us that, not that that means, 100%, but they had promised us that they would stay on the show, which means they are paying weekly rentals to the theater. My tools are there. Our show is there. Everything we need to run the show, wardrobe, lighting, all of it's still right where we left it. So the plan is that once we all get cleared to open Broadway up again and audiences are safe to come in, we'll probably go back in and do a few work call days to make sure that we have gotten the inches of dust off of everything. Everything will be clean, sprayed, maintained. The entire fly system, all the automation, the deck automation will have to be maintained. It will have to be inspected. We'll probably change out all the chain motors for storage. And then I would suspect if everyone's anything like me, we all need to learn the show again. So that includes rehearsals with the actors, that includes tech rehearsals where we do run-throughs of the show with the crew doing all of our cues. A Broadway show, especially a musical, you really got to operate with your head on a swivel. Things move quickly, and things need to be consistent every night. You can get used to your cues with lighting, you can get used to your cues with music, but you also have to be able to think on your toes. When we did Groundhog Day, I was on stage left doing my props job, and I remember right before opening, Andy Carl had a bit where he would leapfrog over another actor in this big medley of now Phil is a good person and he's doing good people things. And right before opening, he popped over on top of an actor, and wouldn't you know it, he tore his ACL, and I had to go out and pull him off the stage and bring him backstage. I've also dealt with 3 major head injuries during load-ins, not my own, thank goodness. So there is a sense of urgency and a sense of attention that you need to be able to keep to it. And when the shows start back, we're all going to have to relearn. So that's what I have there. I think advice for others that are starting out. If there's advice I can give you, it's to take advantage in a good way of the opportunities that are given to you, to make sure you listen to anyone you come in contact with, because everyone can teach you something. And whatever education you're able to pull on the job, through books, anything, make that available to others. Knowledge is power, but you don't need to hold that. You need to spread that. You need to be able to share what you know. It's a way to show people, that you're committed to the community that you're involved in. It also shows that you're willing to work with others. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to everyone.